Howdy folks, old Buster coming to you again. Well, I just gonna tell you, you might see all manner of things happen during these dadgum picture shows we're making. But we're not professionals and don't claim to be. I'm just a regular old feller that's reading the stories. And I hope y'all understand that. Some people want to criticize things, and that's quite alright, but I'm not gonna put on no makeup or have no fancy lighting and none of that. We just gonna read the story. And I know a couple of these stories may have some things in there that might be a little upsetting, but in that particular case, I could say it was probably true. Names had changed, and that happened many, many years ago, but when I was a youngin', but absolutely true. Anyway, let's keep on going here. We got a new story here called Old Thinkin. Well, Buster, what you doing up there? Yelled up Jesse. Hired Walter was a gawking up and when Buster told him he was just a thinking. Well, Buster was high atop a big old pecan tree out back of his and Grandma's house, and he hollered to boys to climb on up. Well, they all shitted on up there with Buster and asked him what all he was a-thinking about. Well, now, the stars, and about being baptized and all, and where all of them would be when they was full growed, and just thinking on such things that would make a feller wonder. Well, Buster done told them all they was closer than brothers to him, and they really was, since he didn't have no brother. Full brother, that is. Buster and Jesse done found out they was cousins, as their folks were married up in the family back in Kentucky. Well, Aunt Judith done some more looking and found out in the old family Bibles that there was folks right close kin, and she called up the boys' folks and had a set tea with them all. She also asked when the boys were going to come back to Mount Sterling for a visit and crank up the distillery. There was summer coming on, and the boys was all getting out of school and making plans for college or working. There wouldn't be much time for all the boys and their folks decided to go on up to Kentucky and see Aunt Judith and get the work done and start up the distillery later on. Since there was money to be had nowadays, the folks could take off for a spell and not be hurting none money-wise. The young'uns could care for the places along with the hired hands till they got back. So the boys and their maws and paws made up to go there about the middle of June. Buster says to the boys if they know Bernice's little boy Jimmy Cochran, and they allowed they did. That was old man Mason's daughter and her boy that lived across the way from Buster. Buster says to the boys that Jimmy Cochran come up to him and told him he wanted to be just like Buster. And that got him to thinking. Jimmy was just a kid, and why in the dickens did he want to be like Buster? Asked Buster. And he asked him, for sure. He said 'cause he was cool and did all kind of exciting things. Well, Buster said to the boys, "Well, look at all the things we done and just what kind of example have we been to them young'uns. Just gets to thinking it all." Well, then Buster says to Walter and the rest of the boys, could they live with that? Well, that got them all to scratching their heads, I'm telling you. Well, Buster said to them, did they remember when he wheeled Hired's motorcycle all the way through England? And when he done drove the convertible to the dryer and him right out to shower with nothing but a towel on? And the time Christmas when he took a gallon of early times that was on a swivel stand and handed out drinks all through town in the back of that convertible car of his'n? Well, about that time he tussled with the boys out there at Stuttgart and socked the priest in the jaw. It was accidental, of course. At the dance in Slovak. And all them gals he sported through town. When he would come in late and meet old Chicken James for a snort of blue moon early of a morning before going out to the farm and all such things as that. Well, Buster told the boys to remember all the things they done together and alone, and it sure enough added up to a passel of mischief. Well, Buster reckoned they needed to make some changes or give back somehow for the young'uns. Well, Buster asked all the boys to put on their thinking caps and get together tomorrow evening and chew the rag over it. Well, all the boys sit up in that old pecan tree for quite a spell, just a thinking and reliving times past. Well, Buster was left with his thoughts when the boys left on out. He thought about riding motorcycles up them tall tech Indian burrow mounds, down by the river, frog gigging on the bayou, hearing the wolf packs running in the breaks late at night when coon hunting, and spooning out in tar bottoms. Remembered when he told his mama he was going to get baptized because he knowed Jesus and walked down that aisle as a 10-year-old at the First Christian Church on Easter Sunday. And he also remembered the worry and deviling he put on his'n folk too. And the first time he come home snockered and couldn't get to the outhouse, and his'n folks never said a word to him about it. He learned his lesson about drinking for sure. Him trying to act like a big man for that red-headed gal Spicer. Gal, plumb pitiful like, wasn't it? Lots of things was a-whirling in his head, and Buster just knowed him and the boys had to do something right for them young'uns to look up to. Well, Buster was right fractious and put out about all of it, and hoped Jesse, Hired, and Walter would come up with an idea to help make things right. Well, Buster did have to admit it was right pleasurable riding through the tunnel of love out at the old river plantations, though. All them big old pecan trees growed over the road and shading it for miles. He could just see it in his mind, the moonlight is streaming through the branches and them kisses sweeter than wine. Why, that's where Walter got his first kiss from Alma May Snow, and moved in, the gal that moved in from Alabama, and where Walter first brung Lou Ann and asked her to go steady. Well, Jesse's pheromones did him in each time he rode through there with a gal, but especially when Bebe and him hooked up and he took her there. Buster got on down and went into the house and told his grandparents he appreciated them and loved them dearly, and went on to bed. His grandma wiped a tear from her eye, and his grandpa just nodded when Buster went on to his bedroom. When you looked out of the window of Buster's room, you could see that old tulip tree him and his grandma loved so much when it bloomed in the spring and early summer. Buster done had it in his craw and wasn't going to let it go, no sirree. He was going to make darn sure him and the boys done something to make up for their shortcomings. When all the boys got together, Buster was all fired up. Just how does a feller go about being his self while exempling to a youngin'? Well, Buster thought about the time he give the Parker boy down the road to ride to ball practice and out at the Burns Park ball field. Buster was in his old Ford and had to stop by Walter's sister's Clara May's bank to get a check cashed. The little gal that was the teller give Buster too much money, and when Buster was a-driving off, he counted his money and seed what she done. She done give him too much money, $1 too much. So Buster up and turns around and takes the $1 back to the gal. She surely was grateful of that, and said to Buster she would have been up there till midnight, trying to balance her tail, and if she didn't balance, she would have to take it out of her own pocket. Well, now, Buster didn't know that gal too well, but knowed she was a carter over from Humnoke and needed her money real bad. Her pa was killed by lightning, and she had to help her ma to feed the family and pay bills. Little Merrill Parker said to Buster why he'd take the time to do that. Well, it weren't but $1 in the bank has lots of money, little Merrill said. So Buster explained to him, and if it had happened to him, wouldn't he want somebody to be honest and return the money? It would have been stealing, Buster told little Merrill. Well, little Merrill reckoned he seed that now. Buster and the boys all told what they had on their minds, and it appeared that all of them wanted to do something, but not be something they wasn't. Well, all the boys finally decided to kind of putting together a boys' club out on Walter's place on the Teacup. It was a right nice place with a clear year-round stream and plenty to do like hunting and fishing. Well, all the boys know they needed a place for the young'uns to light, so they gathered up tents till they got a place built. I reckon their idea was some teamwork and teaching them young'uns life skills, as they call it. Buster would teach them how to make a proper fire and how to drive his old Ford. Walter was going to teach the city boys about welding, farming, and ranching, and riding horses. Jesse tending to business, cooking, and being a good steward with their money and boxing, and Hired was going to teach them how to work equipment and ride motorcycles. There was lots of other things all of them wanted to share and with them boys too, but that just come with time with them. Keeping your word and being an upright feller that knowed Jesus was the most important though. Seeing how there was a little time on their hands, the boys picked a weekend and rounded up a bunch of young'uns from town and out on the farms close by that wanted a little adventure. Well, one boy was a preacher's son over the Plum Bayou. Several boys come from families that didn't have no ma or pa or both. There just weren't no time to spend with the boys, as some of their paws worked 2 jobs and their mom worked out as well. The youngins wasn't just from poor families neither. Any young boy that wanted to was welcome to come. Reckon there might be one or two that was made to come because their folks didn't know what to do with them. They wasn't bad kids, just boys that needed some love and attention. First off, Buster, Walter, and Hire and Jesse told who they was, and that they was going to have some fun together, but there was a firm and fast rule. If in just one of the boys acted up, then they all paid the price. If they didn't mind, home all of them went. Buster and them wasn't going to trifle none with them and put up with no foolishness. The first day they all loaded up early in the morning in Buster's Ford, took off to the Teacup. When they got there, they unloaded their gear and supplies and set up their tents. Camp was made and firewood gathered. Heck, some of the boys couldn't even hammer a nail. Didn't even know how to hold a dang hammer. Choked up on so they couldn't get no power in their sling. Just was a pecking at that old nail and not driving it in at all. Been it most times too. Well, finally Jesse hollered at all of them that he was going to fix up some stew for supper, needed some help. A couple of the boys went to help Jesse, and Walter took a couple of them to the creek to fetch fresh water and check on his fishing hole. Well, Buster and Howard got the rest of them and went to gather some berries and wild plums on the backside of the place. One boy was kind of a loner and wasn't fitting in real well. Excuse me. He would cut up a mite too every now and again. It was the preacher's boy. But everything went along pretty near as expected, and when evening come on, all of them was tired and ready for bed. Well, Buster, Jesse, Walter, and Howard shared a big tent together that they bought a while back, and it had enough room for half a dozen or more fellers in it. They got it at Bennett's Army Surplus there in Little Rock, and some other gear at Irwin's Pawn Shop. David was a friend of theirs from in town, and his and Paul had the pawn shop for years. The next morning there was a ruckus like you ain't never ever heard. Little Milo run into the tent a-yelling to come quick. When the boys looked out the tent, they seed all the young'uns huddled up a-watching the dangest sight you ever seen across the creek. There was a razorback hog a-chasing a wild turkey and a black bear cub a-chasing that hog, and they was just going round and round. Funniest thing a body ever did see, and the boys was all goggle-eyed over it. Some of the boys ain't never been around no livestock, let alone no wild critters, you know. But Walter hollered to the boys to stay put, cause that mama bear was close by and didn't take kindly to nobody messing with her cub. Well, after a bit, all them critters skedaddled out of there and breakfast was put on. Boy howdy, how them youngins could eat. Jesse had to make 2 batches of flapjacks and told Hire they was going to need some more supplies if it kept up. As Buster and Walter was getting ready for the day, Jesse and Hire was putting away breakfast gear, they heard another ruckus. About that time, a couple of the boys started showing out and got into a scuffle. Well, Buster grabbed each one of them and threw them into the creek. Now, that water was from an underground stream, was kind of cold, I'm here telling you. It freezed her down to his gizzard. Them 2 boys come up a-spitting and a-hollering, and one of them hollered he couldn't swim. Buster yelled out to him to just stand up, it weren't deep. Buster got them 2 boys out the water and asked them if they was cool down a mite. They said yes, sir. And Buster told them one more time like that, and off they went. Well, Buster told them if they had a problem, they'd better settle it like men or come to one of the boys and they'd figure it all out. After that, the day went along fine, and Walter and his and Gray's was good with letting the boys ride them. Walter even done a few rope tricks and roped a steer that was on the place. Well, after heading on back to the camp, Buster gave the boys a few driving lessons, and that sure was trying, that's for sure. All agreed that they was glad they had 580 acres of mostly open ground to practice in, because they sure enough needed it all. All the way them boys was a-driving, they didn't know what would happen. Couldn't hurt nothing but a little pride out there, but a few scrubs took down and a cow or 2 sent off a-bawling. Well, danged if and Buster and the boys ain't here to ruckus again, and went out to see what all it was all about. The preacher's boy was dealing out mischief aplenty when they got there. Well, Buster up and tells them all to load up and not to worry about packing. They was leaving right then and there. Buster and Hired put all of them in the back of the truck and would have taken them home. Some of them was a caterwauling and some a crying, and Buster kept a driving. They got down the road a piece, and one of the young'uns started banging on the window, so Buster pulled off to the side of the road. All the boys come up to Hired and Buster and told them that it was all a big mistake. They was just having some fun, and Buster got it all wrong. Got it all wrong. There tweren't no fighting or disagreeing. Buster says, "That's so?" All of them said, "Yes, sir." There was one boy all soiled up like, and it was the preacher's boy again. Buster asked if that was the case, and he mumbled that it was. Well, Buster hired contab for a few minutes and said to the boys that a good understanding made good friends. So they'd go back if and there tweren't no more shenanigans that looked like fighting. Well, all them boys was a-cheering and said to Buster and Hired that they had things to do and to hurry on back. They were going to shoot 22s that afternoon. When they got back to camp, Buster and Hired called over to Walter and Jesse and told them what all happened and to look at the preacher's boy. He had a knot swole up on his head and a shiner to boot. All them other boys took him to task over making them all go home early, and that just wasn't going to happen. Over one bad apple in the bunch. So they fixed that right quick. Well, everything was going just fine, and the day played out real good. Come on early morning, Buster heard somebody slip on into where his bedroll was. Well, if that didn't beat all, it was the preacher's boy. Well, Walter, Jesse, and Hired all heard him come in too, but didn't make a sound. They acted like they didn't hear nothing, and they was all sleeping. That young'un was a shivering and a sobbing a mite, and Buster just let him snuggle up to him and winked at the rest of the boys. The next day, Buster throwed a greased watermelon in the creek and told the boys that the one that brung it back to the bank would get himself a prize. There was a little feller there that had a limp and didn't get around real good, but he jumped on in too. He just wasn't no match for the other boys, though, and didn't have a chance to get that watermelon. But the preacher's boy did. He hustled up to the bank, and there sat the young'un with the limp, barely in the water. That boy handed off that watermelon to the little crippled boy and told him to take it on back to Buster. He sure enough did, and he done got himself a prize. He got him a brand new buck pocket knife. The young'un was proud as punch over that knife, and it was the most important thing he owned. Well, Buster winked and nodded to the preacher's boy and turned around and told the other boys to gather up. Jesse had him a cooking class or two during the day, the whole time they was out at the teacup. He taught them to fix up some good camping grub and even a little breakfast treat for their maws for a surprise. Jesse got a couple of the boys that was a mite rowdy at first and had them boxing with him. He taught them a few things about defending themselves in the spirit of good sportsmanship. Well, over the campfire at night, Jesse would have them young'uns do some figures and the like on how to make their bit of money to go further. He give them all $1 when they took the young'uns back home and told them he wanted to know what they done with it when they come back. Well, Hired was having himself a whale of a time, I'm telling you. Seemed like he was having more fun than the young'uns. Hired had an old 100cc motorcycle he got when he was just starting to learn to ride. It was a mite bunged up, but run real good. Well, Hired showed them young'uns how to trail ride and the safety aspects of riding on the road. Them young boys was a straining at the bit to ride that motorcycle, but had to take turns now. Some of them just didn't want to get off, but Hired see to it that they had to get off and give every one of them an equal time and a chance to ride. And they had to share it. Well, Hired used one of Walter's old tractors for mowing to learn them to use equipment and the dangers that come with that equipment. He'd stick them up there with him in the driver's seat, let them operate the controls, and let them see what they could do. Heck, Hired must have mowed one pasture 4 times over before he was done with teaching them little fellers the ins and outs of machinery. What really got them young'uns was how Hired could operate a backhoe. Hired's pa was doing a job over by the teacup, and he had told his and pa he wanted to use it to show them young'uns a thing or two. Now, old Hired was a real humdinger of an operator of that backhoe for sure, and he could do some mind-boggling things with it. Gosh, a Friday it would take a body's breath away, the things he could do with that backhoe. Of course, he'd been running one since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. First thing Hired done was to pick up a bottle cap with the bucket, then a baseball, and finally a 2-bit piece he throwed down. But the thing that got all of them bumfuzzled was when he took that backhoe and put her up on the top of an old rail car Walter's pa was using for storing blue rock on his road. Hired took that bucket and them hydraulics and lifted her plumb up off the ground of that rail car and then brought her down the same way. That was sure a sight to see. I reckon some of them little fellers might have been influenced to become heavy equipment operators one day, said Hired. And Hired was sure enough grinning telling that, I tell you. Next thing they done was to herd some cows of Walter's to a corral. Well, Walter had all the boys to count them and said to get the count right now. Walter said to them that it seemed there was too many cows in there and that the count just couldn't be right. Well, every boy there swore to heaven it was right. That count, they've all made it several times, and you know that it's just right. That's how many's there. They even huddled up and ciphered on it a bit more. They told Walter it was sure enough a right count. Well, Walter asked what they was to be doing with that extra cow. The boys all said they didn't know. Well, Walter told them since they found that cow, it was really a calf, you know, he reckoned they could keep it. Them boys lit up like a Christmas tree and was hopping and jumping around and asking Walter was he sure. Walter told them that they had to take care of that calf or it'd be took away from them, and who knowed, even made into steaks. Oh my gosh, them boys made an oath to Jesus that they would care for their calf no matter what. Walter told them that meant they had to come on back out to the teacup and see after him, and the boys told Walter they'd come every time he'd let them. Well, all of them boys was petting that calf and giving him some grass and hay to eat. Walter even had some nuggets he let them feed the calf, and they just loved that calf eating out of their hands. Well, it come on tonight, and Hired and Jesse seed all the boys bedded down for the night. Well, Jesse eased on out of the tent later on in the night and told the others that he thought he heard something out there. Sure enough, it was the preacher's boy with a shovel they had brung along with him. He was about to whack something, but Jesse couldn't see what it was. About then, the others come out the tent and see the young'un swing the shovel. Oh, Lordy, what done happened? Hired yelled and run to the tent where all the excitement was going on. All the boys in the tent was up in a corner tighter than sardines in a can. Right about then, the preacher's boy whacked something or someone. Buster and them just didn't rightly know. When they got up to where the young'uns was, it was plain to see what all the fuss was about. A big old timber rattler was chopped up and his and hay plumb took off with that there shovel. The preacher's boy heard the rattle and come out of there, and he got the shovel and killed the snake. That snake sure enough was mad and would have bit one or more of the boys if the preacher's boy hadn't killed him. Turned out the preacher's boy was a hero, and all was forgiven by the rest of the young'uns that night. He was accepted in the group and was a grinning from ear to ear, but humble like too. The next day all of them took a hayride and had a weenie roast and then had to pack up for them to go back to town. Them young'uns just didn't cotton to the idea of leaving, but Buster, Walter, and Jesse and Hired had a few words for them. They spoke to how proud of them they was and that they would bring them back any time. They told them they had their responsibilities at home to take care of business like men. Buster told them they all had to bring a friend if they could, if they wanted to the next time, but he sure knew they sure knew to tell them the rules. They all said to a boy there ain't nobody coming that wasn't acting right, and they'd make darn sure of that. Well, they all loaded up and headed for home. Before they got there, Buster and the boys took them for ice cream at Leake's drugstore. All them young'uns went home happy as a lark. said they'd be back to see all the boys real soon, and how much fun they had. The next Wednesday evening after church services, Buster and the boys met up with the preacher out at Plum Bayou after he called up Buster's grandma and left a message for him to meet him there. Well, first off, the preacher met with the boys in his office and said he didn't really know what all went on out the teacup, but he sure enough had a changed son. He said him and his wife dearly appreciated what all the boys done for all them youngins, but would they tell him what happened out there? Well, Buster and the boys told a story of what all took place and how it all turned out. The preacher man had tears in his eyes and shook each of their hands and said they done a miracle him and his wife prayed for. The preacher took them all out to the meeting hall, and lo and behold, all them youngins folks was there too. Every ma and pa had nothing but good things to say to Buster, Jesse, Hire, and Walter. They knowed all their folks, for the most part, and already spoke to them about all the changes that took place with their youngins. They all said if there was anything they could do to help with the cabin or supplies or just anything, just ask. The next Sunday, the preacher man had the best sermon a preacher could preach, and the message sure went through the grapevine. It wasn't long that a cabin was built and folks was volunteering to help. The local stores in town was donating to the cause too. All manner of building materials and equipment was given to them. The ranch growed mighty quick after that, and many a young boy come through there and found life lessons and life changes that served him in good stead later on in life. The ranch evolved into something big and was took over by the sheriff's department to help all the boys and wayward ones especially. Not only did it help the community, but it got hitched to a state organization and later on a national one. Buster, Jesse, Walter, and Howard know they done good and give back, and that this was the best idea they'd ever had. They did it with what they knowed and what they was. They did it their way. P.S. Later on in years, all the boys were back in town for a class reunion. They was walking down Main Street to get a hamburger at the pool hall when a young man with a little boy tagging along come up to Buster and give him a hug right there in broad daylight. Said he wanted his boy to meet Buster and the boys. It was the preacher's boy, full-growed, married up, and preaching at the Little Baptist Church in Plum Bayou. Y'all have a blessed day. Yes.